What were you doing back in November of 2014? Were you sitting in a college dorm watching Rooster Teeth like me? Were you getting off the bus in high school and running home to see the new Achievement Hunter video? Maybe you were even in middle school, or God forbid elementary school, and way too young to be taking in this kind of content. There's also a solid possibility you hadn't even discovered Rooster Teeth yet in November of 2014. For me, I can tell you that I was about halfway through college and at my all-time high as a Rooster Teeth fan. I felt like I had watched almost everything they had ever put out as a company and was definitely consuming almost every video every week from the beginning of 2013 through to that point in 2014. And that is when Rooster Teeth announced that they were going to be doing a special holiday murder mystery show called 10 Little Roosters. Now, it's probably not a surprise to many that the creator Josh Flanagan got his inspiration from Agatha Christie's novel, And Then There Were None. Now, the very nature of this whole thing is a murder mystery show, and it came out 12 years ago. So if you don't want to get spoiled, I definitely recommend you go back and watch it. It's fantastic. So let that be our spoiler warning as we get into 10 Little Roosters, a retrospective. So this was a really exciting thing at the time, and Josh Flanagan has said in some interviews that he wanted to show off kind of a proof of concept for how interactive a web series could be at that point. So the premise was pretty simple. We knew that we were going to get an episode that gave us a mystery, and at the end of every week, there would be a questionnaire that the fans would fill out. It would ask you different questions about the episode, who you think the killer was, how the person would die, and who would be killed each week. If you kind of want to play along while we're going through the video, that's totally fine. I won't spoil who wins or who gets killed until we get to them, but I will tell you what the rules were back then for the competition. So first, any character that has been killed in the series is dead for good. No plot twists, no fake deaths, etc. There is only one survivor at the end of the series, but the survivor is not the same person as the killer. The only characters that are involved in the mystery are the 10 party guests when introduced in the first episode. Whilst the plot may thicken over the course of the series, there is only one person responsible for all the murders. In the first episode, it's revealed that Gavin has a clone of himself at the party as well. The rule states that whatever happens to one of the Gavins must happen to the other one as well. So they can't survive until the end if the other has died earlier in the series. So basically, the Gavins were counted as one person. Okay, so now we have the rules. I think the only other thing you really need to know is that this show was a huge amalgamation for what the last several years of Rooster Teeth, and really Rooster Teeth all the way at the beginning, has been building to, in many, many different ways that we'll discuss as the show goes on. But while we're doing this, if you weren't a part of it, really try to put yourself in the mind of a fan at that point. If you want to call it like the Avengers Endgame or Infinity War for Rooster Teeth, that's how it felt for a lot of people at the time. It was a lot of inside jokes all coming together, and it was a chance for everyone to really bond on the internet over their favorite thing. So let's start off with 10 Little Roosters, episode 1, And Then There Were 9. This will be a little late for you at home, but I actually watched this over the Christmas holidays, and it just fit the vibe so well. So we open with this awesome sounding song to set the mood. And no, I'm not talking about the stock score for the murder mystery, but Barbara's cat piano. And that's when we meet our ensemble of characters. We go through a couple little flashes. We get to see Adam and Miles messing with Adam's beard. Michael and Lindsay are having an argument over what Michael is going to leave her in his will, and she remarks that it's a good thing he has great life insurance, because there's red herrings all over the place. We get to see Chris in his Lord of the Rings garb, his Hobbit garb, from Simple Walk into Mordor, which had released within the last year or so. He remarks, much to Gus's chagrin, that they are best friends, and drops the line from Tolkien that not all who wander are lost, to which Gus responds that not all who work here are fucking nerds. Of course, we get the founder, Bernie, and then we get Gavin and his other clone, Gavin, which is a fun throwback to the old RT short where Gavin cloned himself. And then we get to meet the guy who goes on to betray the trust of his friends, co-workers, and fans. Bernie asks Barb to cut off the cat piano, and we get Michael addressing the audience and all of our potential killers. A fun little side note, if you look in the back at the sign, they kept trying to spell inaugural and just gave up. So Michael passes out these folders to each character, and inside the folder is a link to something dark in their past at Rooster Teeth. We have Bernie getting his picture of Shannon that he locked in the time machine to send him to the future from the RT short. Of course, we do get to see the fate of baby Gus. Miles opens his folder to just find one of Barbara's pictures of dicks that she takes back before receiving another folder from Michael, which just contained more of Barbara's dick doodles. When confronted about the evidence they've all been given, Michael reveals that he has a gun, and he tells them all that one of them is a cold-blooded killer, and he was up there to protect himself. This results in a little dick-sucking joke that if you look behind Bernie, you can actually see Miles seemingly breaking character a little bit. But Michael takes another sip from the drink, chokes, and dies in front of the whole group. Gus is blamed because he handed off the champagne, but on the champagne glass, there are actually pieces of Adam's beard hair. Barbara suggests that everyone leave, and that's when Bernie, Miles, and Gus find a note attached to the wall. Bernie accuses Gus of hanging up his poetry again, which he's been known to do. That's when we find out that this was a message left by the killer that would be our framework for the evening. Bernie then reads the poem with dramatic shots of each person. The poem goes, 10 little roosters, all gathered to dine. One choked on his rage, and then there were 9. 9 little roosters, now running from fate. One tripped over themselves, and then there were 8. 8 little roosters, 2 others in heaven. One was martyred, and then there were 7. 7 little roosters, one liked to draw dicks. Life imitated art, and then there were 6. 6 little roosters, some often streamed live. One died to scale, and then there were 5. 5 little roosters, one trapped in the floor. One ran out of air, and then there were 4. 4 little roosters still trying to flee. One got what they wanted, and then there were 3. Just 3 roosters left. One died of a pun. The killer was killed, and then there was 1. So, obviously, each line in the poem corresponds with an episode and a person who dies. The first one, of course, choked on his rage, Michael, rage quit Jones, and then there were 9. This whole montage features a bunch of little Easter eggs, like one liked to draw dicks, clearly being a nod at Barbara, who was really into drawing dicks at the time. Interestingly enough, too, it says one died of a pun, and Barbara Punkelman was probably at the height of her pun popularity at this point. We even get a little "God damn it, Barb" from Bernie.
Hey guys, check it out. I got a new spoiler for the back of my car.
God damn it, Barb!
The cast speculates that it couldn't possibly be the people who are being shown, unless, of course, the writers already thought of that. We see Chris playing with his model sword Sting from Lord of the Rings that glows whenever evil is near. Which is actually funny because I ended up watching Lord of the Rings after I watched all of the Rooster Teeth content centered around Lord of the Rings. So this is my first time watching it, having seen Lord of the Rings, and that's a fun little detail. Tempers are flaring. Lindsay insists that whoever's doing this has a god complex. Chris has the idea, because his sword has now stopped glowing, that each person come up one at a time to see which one makes his sword glow, so he can just give him a little stab, thus ending the mystery. Miles likes the plan, but he's very apprehensive to step up and get close to the sword. Also, that could be because Chris keeps saying he's just going to stab him just because. I'll give some insight into what I remember the fandom discussing around 10 Little Roosters. For this, I really remember people thinking that the sword was kind of a fake out and that there was a really good chance Chris could be the killer. It seemed a little too obvious for me, but definitely something that was in people's minds. Miles gets a big laugh out of me here because Chris now points out that him and Miles are best friends, and Miles quickly corrects them that they aren't best friends, they've only talked about getting lunch at one point. Miles eventually relents, steps up to get stabbed by Chris, but the lights cut out, and when they come back on, it's just Chris by himself in the break room, and he begins talking to himself, and then speculates that the reason he has no friends is because he won't stop talking to himself. The episode ends with a beautiful portrait of Michael Jones, and his line from the poem below him, and the mystery began for the community back in 2014. Now, I don't remember what my guesses were, or even what the prizes were. There was one prize for the person who got the most correct, or for the person who got the killer. I got one answer right, I believe, amongst all of the other questions, and they asked like 4 or 5 questions a week, and the one question I got right was who dies in the next episode, because I think everyone in the community got that one. This brings us to episode 2, which opens with one of my favorite of Bernie's recurring characters, one of my favorite accents of his, and that is his police officer accent.
I'm an undercover cop.
We learn that Bernie was actually a cop, presumably in Boston, and the killer actually killed his partner, who was played by Aaron Marquis. Bernie, in order to catch the killer, decided to trap everyone at Rooster Teeth inside the offices for a ultimate murder banquet, and we learn that this is all actually Bernie's doing. A little side note, we learned that Bernie spent months with a vocal coach learning his normal Bernie talking voice because it was so hard to break his Boston cop accent. It's also further explained that Bernie actually hired Michael and Michael was a paid chump, but Michael did actually die and that was an unintended consequence. In the conversation between Bernie and the elephant in the room, it's brought up that of course Bernie's going to survive because it's going to be Red versus Blue all over again, to which Bernie reminds the audience and anybody who hasn't watched Red versus Blue that his character Church is the first character to die in Red versus Blue.
Firing main cannon.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What? Oh, son of a bitch.
We also get to catch up with Lindsay and Barbara who run into each other. Barbara's standing on top of a chair because all of the poisonous animals were let out of Joel's office. Now, this could just be a reference to Joel being kind of a weirdo. Not totally sure on that one, but we do get a reference here with Lindsay being obsessed with cats, which was a huge plot point in Achievement Hunter. We get to see Miles then walking down a hallway where he's kind of having this inner monologue with himself, talking about needing to go into Ruby mode to get through this crisis. He then runs into a big batch of mousetraps laying on the floor, which is where I'll bring up that one of the questions that they would ask at the end of every episode was, what is the murder weapon that will be used to kill the person in the next episode? So a lot of the things that are held up or shown are something that could be used as a murder weapon. Chris is sneaking around somewhere else when his sword lights up and he runs into the killer. The killer then holds up some gasoline and a match, to which Chris engages him in a battle of wits. Meanwhile, Gavin is running around the office and finds Adam and dislodges his beard from the gate, but only after Adam swears on Mr. Bean and Sean Connery that he's not the killer. Riddles in the Dark continues, with Chris getting more and more self-deprecating, basically finding closure on the fact that girls think he's weird and that he is potentially the reason that his parents got divorced. This results in Chris breaking down crying, and he falls into the embrace of the killer, who decides that Chris is too pathetic and not worth his time. It's at this point that I say that Chris is phenomenal, one of my favorite people at Rooster Teeth. Go watch Good Morning from Hell and Tales from the Stinky Dragon, or even my interview that I did with him. The killer leaves Chris alone, and then we see Gavin walking along with Adam when he hears Gavin number 2, his clone, crying out for help. He's doing the universal Gavin call, or the Gavin signal, which is usually the sound that Gavin makes when he's being killed in Minecraft.
Balls.
He runs off to go find him, and that's when the two turn a corner right in front of the mousetraps, slam into each other, and we get a slow-mo guy sound followed by a montage of the blood and viscera of Gavin's falling around and being destroyed and killed by the mousetraps. And that's the end of episode 2, and the one answer I got correct because the clue was 1 tripped over themselves, and then there were 8 because Gavin tripped over Gavin, thus they tripped over themselves. Episode 3 starts at the patch set with Lindsay, and man, doesn't that bring back 2/3 of a great memory. Lindsay then sees Adam, who's sitting on the other side of the glass with his beard, of course, caught in a microphone. Adam then laments that he's had a lot of items stolen and lists off what's gone. And I think all of them were most likely murder weapons that were able to be chosen. But they do introduce their goal, which is to survive till morning when the cleaning lady comes. And only at this point does Lindsay bring up that she does have something missing from her office, and it's kind of weird. That's when we hear the signature guitar from the Jeff Williams and Casey Williams song, This Will Be the Day, from Ruby. Miles then reveals that he's actually literally putting on the Ruby suit, and that's how he's going to make it through the rest of the evening. I will say, as someone who still hasn't really watched all that much Ruby, it still hit for me because I know enough about Ruby to recognize the costume, the song, and that Miles is a writer for Ruby. So a really good job of keeping it kind of base level for the audience so everyone still knows what's going on without it feeling too in-jokey. The inconvenient truth reveals that he has been having fantasies of murdering Gavin and Michael, and that they could be manifesting into real life. Barbara and Gus discuss plans for the upcoming RTX, but Gus won't let Barbara get anywhere near his computer, so that's kind of odd. Chris runs into Bernie and explains that the killer is a skeletal creature that likes to play riddles in the dark, to which Bernie realizes that Chris has lost it, and pleads him to break his role-playing phase and come back to the world of men. Another big laugh out of me here, Chris starts explaining that Lord of the Rings actually came before Dungeons & Dragons, and he's kind of lore dumping on Bernie, to which Bernie says, "Oh God, please don't tell me any of this." Chris pulls his sword and reveals that it is blue. He believes Bernie's the killer, but then behind Bernie we see the actual killer with Adam's stolen bow and arrow that was mentioned at the beginning of the episode. The killer looses an arrow, Chris jumps in front of Bernie and takes an arrow straight to the chest. I almost said knee. And then, as Chris crumples to the ground, Bernie readies his pistol to shoot back at the killer, and Chris goes full Boromir and has a heroic death via many, many arrows while trying to kill the killer with his sword from very, very far away. Then we get Chris with his death portrait, and one was martyred, and then there were 7. Of course, martyred here being used like he was treated like the martyr Boromir. Episode 4 starts with Barbara running into Adam, who yet again has his beard stuck in something else, and it is the cage for a puma that was sent in by a fan. The puma, of course, could be an obvious reference to Red vs. Blue, or even that story where Joel was on set with a puma. I think it was a puma? I don't know, go back and watch the RTAA, you'll have a good time. Barbara frees him and the two split up, only for us to see Lindsay floating in a vast ocean, then a new landscape before we find out she's just standing in front of a green screen.
Movie magic!
Just a little bit of movie magic. This guy again. He has a breakdown in front of the mirror thinking that he may be the killer. He references the murder break that he was on with Achievement Hunter at the time before he's approached by a creeper that he promptly kills for the helmet to bust open like in The Empire Strikes Back and reveal that he was the true monster all along. This glimpse into his employment future is too much for him, so he passes out. Gus bonds with Miles because he believes, due to the Ruby costume, that Miles has gotten in touch with his inner femininity, which makes Gus reveal that he's actually a poet and has been secretly writing poetry. Maybe he could be our killer, or at least the writer of the poem. Finally, we see that Bernie has had enough and he is suiting up. He grabs guns, a wiffle ball bat, a grenade, and he is ready to go and fight the killer. But it's at that moment that he is stung by a scorpion that had escaped Joel's office. He looks down at the scorpion and collapses and dies as the camera slowly pans up. That's when we hear the song Relay from Trocadero, and we see the M808 main battle tank. For those uninitiated with Red vs. Blue, Bernie's character Church is killed by the M808 main battle tank, which in the Halo games is called a scorpion. Thus, life imitated art, and then there were 6. The next episode opens with the walking trigger warning, waking up in a giant hole. Next up, we get to hear the fantastic Ashley Jenkins, future Ashley Burns, giving a voiceover of Gus's thoughts, specifically his poem that he's written, "My name is Gustavo, but please call me Gus." In his mind's eye, we see that he envisions himself as Lindsay Jones. Barbara stumbles upon the Edgar hole and asks the million-dollar question.
Why'd you put yourself in a hole?
Then Barbara attempts to break the glass with her cat keyboard. But then Barbara realizes a lost cause for what he is and exits the room. Somewhere else in the office, Miles and Adam Ellis are doing their best O.J. Simpson impressions. Miles goes off to find the secret beacon to the police that Monty has under his desk. Then our kill scene is Gus opening up the door and coming face to face with the killer, who drives a pitchfork right through the middle of Gus, making Gus die exactly the same way that baby Gus did. Because one died to scale, and then there were 5. Before we move on to the next episode, let's just listen to the intro and remember when times were better. This episode opens with a nice little recap of things by Lindsay in the style of The Know. I vividly remember this episode because it heavily focuses on the problem-shaped thing in the hole. This was weird because the comments at the time were really holding this performance up as some sort of Oscar-worthy performance that proved that this person was destined for bigger things than Rooster Teeth. The whole thing culminates in a fake-out death where it was a reference to the Achievement Hunter bit, "I'm still in the air." So a lot of people thought that he was going to be the one who ended up getting killed, when in fact it was Adam who was strangled from behind in the mocap suit, which results in a hilarious little animation that Miles gets to witness. Probably the weakest of the clues. One ran out of air and then he's strangled. Maybe I'm missing a joke in there. Comment below if I'm completely missing something. Because while I have made a 2-hour video just talking about Rooster Teeth lore and have a 12-hour video planned, I haven't watched all the Rooster Teeth stuff, so please educate me. The penultimate episode opens with cat taps as played by Barbara on her cat piano, while we get Jordan Swear's animated adventure characters in each of their death poses. After the song, Barbara seems to accidentally trip on a tripwire that releases the puma, which chases down Miles in a cinematic shot. And you know, Steven Spielberg once said the reason why the shark was so terrifying in Jaws is because you barely saw it. I think that may apply here in a similar way. Miles is able to escape the puma before it starts chasing Barbara, who calms it down or puts it in a trance with her cat piano, because we're kind of off the rails here. Ryan's about to get killed by the puma before Lindsay, ever the lover of cats, convinces the puma to come towards her, and unfortunately, Lindsay gets what they wanted, and then there were 3. What the fuck? Now we're on the last episode, and I'm not sure if you've been keeping track at home, but they reveal it right out of the gate. Barbara's the killer. Before Barbara starts her monologue explaining what happened, we get to see Miles, who was glued to a treadmill and forced to run to death, which I initially thought was the pun, but then I realized I'm an idiot. It's because his name is Miles, as in he couldn't go the extra mile. Yeah, you get it. I do enjoy the bit where he just jumps up on the sides of the treadmill where he'd be completely fine, but then just continues running. So Miles is out, and we know that the killer can't be the final survivor, so we now have our winners. Now all that's left is to reveal the clues. And let me just say, the clues were way more involved than I thought they would be. I think I was looking for something very overtly in my face, you know. I mean, maybe I was just being an idiot, but the clues were like how Barbara didn't have a glass in front of her, and she poisoned the glass that Michael drank from, because in some of the shots at the beginning of the first episode, you hear her on the cat piano, and in other shots you don't. One of the things that I felt really stupid about back then was Lindsay saying whoever did this has a real god complex, because it's kind of a weird delivery of the line out of nowhere off screen.
Whoever this is has a real god complex.
And of course, you know, God damn it, Barb. So Barbara starts to explain that this was basically all planned out. She killed Bernie's partner because she knew that Bernie would stage this elaborate dinner party in order to catch the killer. Barbara set up all the traps, lured everyone to her poem, and that's when people started dying left and right. What's funny is, watching it all these years later, it is true that, you know, Barbara's kind of silliness and not taking everything too seriously, but also wanting to find the killer did throw me pretty well when I was younger, though every time I talk to someone about the show, they always say they guessed it in the first episode. So, I don't know, a bunch of people must have won that prize. Barb's ultimate plan was to frame the HR violation for all of the murders and kill him, which would make her killing the killer, and then she'd be the last one. But unfortunately, her plans are cut short by a real-life creeper suit that is loaded with TNT, which makes her explode. I will say some of the more obvious clues that I feel like I should have picked up on were like Barbara's dick drawings being inside the envelope. The line from Lord of the Rings definitely should have helped me out some. Also, I love seeing the gauntlet trophy, but does that also mean that the winners didn't get it? Very interesting. Maybe we should do this with the gauntlet. I had a lot of fun with that, season 1 and 2. Let me know if that's something that would be fun to go back and revisit. But we get credits on one of my favorite Rooster Teeth productions of all time, 10 Little Roosters. What a fun little series, perfect for the holidays, and you only have to wait like 10 months for it to come back around. But that's fine, because I spoiled most of it here if you haven't seen it already, and if you have, let's be honest, you're just going to watch the first episode and then, who knows, maybe come back to this video, get a little recap. If you like talking Rooster Teeth with people who know ball, maybe listen to the Flying the Coop podcast. Also, I have a Discord server where all the members of the Flying the Coop podcast and I will do Rooster Teeth watch parties, usually every week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in a week or so. Oh, also, yeah, this asshole wins.